Hello there. I'm Michael Morpurgo, and I know you are orchestral class, and I know, because I'm told you've been reading a book of mine called Beowulf. I wanted to tell you something about it. I think you're in Cornwall and somewhere, so these kind of legends and stories, well, they're in the rocks and hills and cliffs of Cornwall. You have so many stories down there. It's wonderful. But Beowulf, of course, doesn't come from Cornwall. It comes from another rocky place, Denmark. And as you will know, many Danish people came over here hundreds and hundreds and thousands of years ago, and they brought with them their language and they brought with them their stories. And so this story, Beowulf, well over 1,000 years ago, was told, not written down because there's no printing press, obviously, and all stories then were told around a fireside, in halls, in houses. And that's how the story got known. And eventually a great poet, and we don't know who it was, wrote it down over 1,000 years ago. It's one of the oldest stories written down in our language, which of course we can't understand now because our language has changed so much over the years. Anyway, I've always loved this story from when I first read it at university. And I thought, tell it in language of today so that people like you and me can understand it, because it's a really fantastically, well, it's dark, as you know, and it's exciting and it's full of horror, and it's also a story about us, about human nature. It's about courage and loyalty, all these things, which, you know, were important to people 1,000 years ago, and they are now. And it's a good time to talk about this story, because as you know, there is a sort of beast out there at the moment. You know, we call it the pandemic, COVID, whatever you like to call it, which threatens us and frightens us. And we have to be very careful when we're around it, and it's around us. And I know it's not the same thing as an actual beast, but if you could imagine it as a beast, it gives you some idea. At a time when people lived 1,000 years ago, when there was a bit of a noise outside, you didn't call the police and there was no ambulance to call, you were on your own in the darkness. And people did believe in monsters and ghosts and this sort of thing. And they were very frightened a lot of the time. And these stories helped in many ways. So what I thought I'd do in a moment is to tell you who my favorite character is. I've got two favorite characters. And then I'll read you a bit, because I thought that might be interesting. Okay, let me start with Hrothgar, who's there right at the beginning of the book. He's the king of the Danes. And this, of course, is the place where Grendel first attacks, comes out of his dreadful lair and comes across the moor and into this huge great hall which Hrothgar has built, and does terrible murder and terrible damage. And Beowulf, and this is the whole story, gets to hear about it. And the Danes are the friends of the Geats, and so he comes across the sea and sees, because he wants to help. He wants to see what he can do to defend Hrothgar. And there's a very moving moment when Hrothgar and Beowulf meet. Beowulf is young and he's strong and he's a great warrior and comes with all this reputation. And Hrothgar is an old man by now. He's lost his strength of his youth and the vigor of his youth. And he's feeling very frail. And suddenly this young man full of new strength and vitality and determined to get rid of Beowulf comes along. And as we know, he does. Things go on afterwards, and the story doesn't end happily. It's not a happily ever after sort of story at all. But he stands up to Grendel. That's the point. And as we know, as the story goes on, the story gets more complicated, and there are more challenges after the first challenge. And my second favorite character, I suppose, is probably one of the nasty ones. I'm very fond of the part of the story which is about the dragon in a cave who is sleeping on this pile of gold. It's the most wonderful story. It's a wonderful picture in this book of this dragon sleeping on the gold. And it's about someone who comes in and steals the gold. And life gets pretty hard for him after that. And then, of course, my favorite character is everyone's favorite character in this book, which is Beowulf himself. I mean, Beowulf was, he's one of these heroes from legend who are sort of superhuman, you know, they are so brave and so strong, and people follow them because they're like this. And he's good to people, he's kind to people, he's generous to people, but he really hates evil. And in a sense, he's the epitome of good and the struggle between good and evil. That's what this story is all about, the evil out there and the good that's inside human beings, mostly. Anyway, so what I thought I'd do is I'd read you two little pieces, the beginning of it, and I'll read you a piece about the dragon, because I told you it's my favorite. I hope you've got time for this, but here's a tiny, tiny bit. So here's how the story begins. And the language, remember, is me taking the old poem and translating it into modern language. And what I tried to do is to keep the rhythm of it, the echo of it, so that you've got some idea what the old language sounded like, but you can still understand it. Hear and listen well, my friends, and I will tell you a tale that has been told for 1,000 years and more. It may be an old story, yet as you will discover, it troubles and terrifies us now as much as it ever did our ancestors. For we still fear the evil that stalks out there in the darkness and beyond. We know that each of us in our time, in our own way, must confront our fears and grapple with this monster of the night, who, given a chance, would invade our homes and even our hearts if he could. And here's the middle part of the story, really. And it's about the dragon. And I'll sort of read to you the piece where the gold is found and what happens. I'll just show you the picture. It's a wonderful picture, which I really like. I can show you there. Do you see the dragon sleeping there? You know, and there's all the gold pile he's lying on. Anyway, he's fast asleep. Here it is. For 300 years or more, deep in a burial mound, high on the cliffs above the moors, lay a horde-guarding dragon, sleeping all this while, undisturbed. So he might have stayed forever, harmless in his dragon dreams, a hoard of golden treasure for his bed. No one would ever have known of him, nor of the treasure. But quite by chance, some nameless slave happened upon this cave. Condemned to a flogging and on the run from his warrior master, he found the opening and, seeking any shelter he could find, crept in and came across this slumbering dragon, curled up on his pile of treasure. Heaps of hoard things they were. Seized with sudden terror at the sight of this monstrous dragon, the unfortunate slave wanted only to escape, but one golden goblet lay close by, so close he simply could not resist it. He snatched it up and ran for his life. And even as he ran, an idea came into his head. This goblet would be a perfect gift for my master, he thought. I'll go back and give it to him. Maybe it will appease his fury. Little did he know what fire fury he would bring upon himself and his whole people by this thoughtless act. Little did he know or care how this treasure came to be there with the death dragon guarding it. How in a heathen age, long ago, one sole survivor from a whole tribe of earls, brought to a sudden and violent war death, carried this treasure hoard of talismans out to the mound, for he knew he could no longer guard it and care for it himself. He decided to hide it, bury it, where no one could ever find it. Over the treasure, he bewailed his grief for his lost friends, for the joys they had shared, crying out to the earth itself to protect the precious tribe treasure, the last vestiges of a proud people now slaughtered and silent in death, all their harp playing, all singing, done forever. So he left his treasure-filled mound, and maddened with grief wandered the wind-wild moors until death came for him too. Soon all that tribe was gone, but the treasure remained. And soon there came that way a dreaded dragon, a night ravager, a foul flame fiend he was, always seeking out hellish hiding holes where he could rest. One day he happened upon this same treasure-filled mound. Fate had brought him there and made it his own, possessed it with his power, sleeping there on this priceless pillow till the end of time. Not that it did him any good. Possession was all his joy. So for 300 years, undisturbed, this death dragon guarded his underground hoard, until that doomed day when that wretched slave came across the place by chance, discovered the godless creature sleeping there, and carried off that golden goblet, a peace offering to his master, so he thought. A luckless man, but the dragon, through his serpent scales, had felt the loss of his treasure, and hearing the footfall of the intruder, opened one angry eye and watched him go. After 300 years, he was slow to wake. This worm of wickedness now slithered out of his hole, followed where the fleeing slave had gone. Rage roaring, he circled his mound looking for the man's footprints, but found none out there in the wilderness. Yet he knew his treasure house had been breached, knew the golden cup had been stolen from him, and was burning with fire fury at the offense. He would have his sweet revenge, that was sure. He longed now for the flames of war, for the fire of battle again after so many years of sleep. He could hardly wait. There we are. Well, that's probably my favorite moment in the whole story. I love doing it. I love Michael Foreman's drawings. He drew wonderful images of Beowulf himself and of his warriors and of the landscape and of the moors and of the monsters, Grendel and his mother. And I just love writing it. I've done quite a lot of retellings. When you've done this one, listen, look for a book of mine called Gawain and the Green Knight. Gawain and the Green Knight. One of the tales of King Arthur. And you know where King Arthur is supposed to have come from? Cornwall. Your place, I think. Because I'm not exactly sure where you are. I just know your orchestral class, year 4. Listen, I wish you well. Some of you will be at home, some of you at school. Have a happy time, get through this time, read lots of books, and see if you can find Gawain and enjoy it if you do. He's probably my favorite hero of all time because he had flaws. He's like us all, the things that, we don't do terribly well and we're not very good at, and failings, we call them now. And I like that because it's human. It's not too heroic. Gawain, remember the name. Gawain and the Green Knight. I wish you well. Happy people in Cornwall. I'm speaking to you from Devon, which isn't too far away. Just across Bodmin Moor and then Dartmoor. I can see Dartmoor outside my window. So I wish you well from Dartmoor. Bye-bye.